My name is Tracy Spesia. I'm the Field Experience Coordinator and Partnership Liaison at the University of St. Francis here in Illinois, Joliet. I'm also the edTPA Coordinator because I work on a small campus and we do wear many hats, but it's not even my official job title. So I bring you the experience that we've had at the University of St. Francis. We've been implementing since 2012 and have grown and developed our supports for candidates across the program, and I hope that I can share those with you in a way that's helpful. Try and bring you some concrete information and potentially be able to share some ideas that you could bring to inform what we're doing and that we can brainstorm across our campuses. We're having some technology with the clicker, so this is my clicker. Lance is going to click. So I'll just be giving him the high sign as we go along. So if we start with the next slide, you see that this is about candidates being successful, but I really want to be explicit about when we're talking about supporting candidates so they can be successful, we're really talking about they can be successful teachers. And when they're able to meet the expectations of the edTPA, that's just falling right in line with our expectations for them as teachers. So we really always want to keep that clear for ourselves and our candidates. We don't want to set up a paradigm where we're just about passing the edTPA, and I think everybody knows that, but the earlier you are in implementation, the easier it is to lose track of the big picture because of potentially the high stakes nature of the assessment or just the unpacking you need to do yourselves for your programs, never mind the supports you provide for candidates. So thinking about these constructs, the first thing we want to make sure our candidates can do is that they know their content, right? We want them to align to standards. It's about the pedagogy. So we know that successful teachers are hyper and highly aware of their specific content needs. We want to make sure that they know their students. And we've always been pretty good at knowing their students' needs, but this edTPA has helped us articulate the need to know their assets, their strengths, what do they bring, and how are we going to use that for their learning. So that's something that we want to make sure we're measuring and supporting. We want to make sure that they're thinking about where research and theory really inform practice, not just because they learned it in their methods class or their collaborating teachers do it, but that they become drivers of instructional decision making. And they're very aware of the fact that best practices didn't fall from the sky, but that they've been vetted and thought through. And then we want to make sure that they put all those pieces together. They know their content, they know their students, and they know where best practice comes from and how to find it, and they reflect upon their instructional decision making. So that's what we want our candidates to be successful at, and that's where we provide supports. And along the way, we're getting them also ready to show that they can do that on this portfolio. But before we talk about teacher candidates, I realized when I put this together that I really needed to talk about the faculty. We really need to talk about the people that are supporting our candidates before we just talk about the supports. And I don't think I can minimize that you can't minimize that role, that it really is essential that the faculty are informed. So I would ask you to do this in your head. You don't need to do a show of hands, but what does your faculty know about edTPA on a scale of 1 to 5? I would ask yourself that question. 1 would be they don't know a thing. 5 would be that you could not beat them in edTPA trivia, right? So, like my kids play Harry Potter trivia, and it's amazing the level of detail that they can get these really tricky questions. So, what are the edTPA stumpers? What if you had a left-handed candidate and a right-handed student, and they were to be assessing a particular? So thinking of all of the what-ifs of edTPA. So on a 1 to 5, the people who are supporting your candidates, where would they fall in that continuum? I think that's something to think about. And then how do they feel? How do they feel about the edTPA? Which we can't minimize the impact also of attitudes about and perceptions and how much they influence the performance and how much they influence the value we place. So 1 would be they can't stand it, they just can't abide it in the least, and 5 would be that they can't find a bad thing to say about it. It's all good, all the time, edTPA. So again, on your 1 to 5, where do your faculty fall? Where do the people who support your candidates fall? And I would contend that the best thing that you can do for your candidates would be to improve those scores. No matter what supports you put in place, no matter what scaffolds you have, no matter what opportunities you have across your program, and those all matter, and they do bring great results in confidence, and practice, and clarity, and alignment to those successful teaching practices of which I just spoke. But if your faculty really don't know much about the edTPA, and they really have very negative attitudes about it, that's going to take a big piece of the pie out in terms of preparation. It's really setting the table, really all of the experiences really lay on that. Never mind the possibility for some really bad information being passed, because there can be misunderstandings about what edTPA expects, and if our faculty aren't really dialed up on the particulars, they could be actually misinforming our candidates. Because our faculty are going to deliver information about it, they're going to describe the context, what it's for, why we're doing it, and they're going to provide their perceived value, which is going to have a heavy influence on our candidates' information and their context and their value, right? So knowing that, the faculty influence piece, whatever candidates know and where they see the edTPA in the context of their professional career and how much they value it, it's going to directly impact their experience and potentially their performance level. So I think we have to situate these conversations around supporting candidates across the programs in this really important piece. So I'd like to start by talking about what we might do to support our faculty. The first thing is this focus on the key content understanding. So just by show of hands, would you know exactly what the central focus of a particular handbook that you might be working in? Would you know what the central focus is? Do you know the key content understanding? If you work with math, if I were to say, oh, you work with social science, secondary social science, what's the central focus of that portfolio? Would you know? Would anybody know that? Okay, that's good. Would you know where to find it if you don't know it? Okay, so this to me is the lighthouse of the whole portfolio. This, if you're out at sea and you're drifting and you can't find the lighthouse, you're probably in trouble. You need to get yourself back to that beacon. So the central focus drives the whole portfolio. And I would like to just take a minute, to be honest, I didn't know that lunch would be so close to the room that I would be speaking in. So I did bring, out of the drawer yesterday when I was in my office, extra handbooks that I happen to have lying around. If anybody has any handbooks, I would really like to take a minute and help you find that. And I think anytime you engage with edTPA, if you can't center yourself on the central focus of the handbook that you're talking about, you should go do that. So I'm just going to toss a few of these around. There are all kinds of content areas. And maybe kind of loop up a little bit. If anybody has a handbook with them, please stick it out. Sure. Yes. Everything here, from early childhood to secondary science to... So if you could just kind of take a minute, I'll tell you where to go, and if you could just go there as close as you can to somebody you're near that might have their hands on the handbook. Or just listen to where it is and go do it, I guess, on your own. Here's what you need to do. The place where you would find the central focus is always going to be in the planning tabs, because before candidates can get started creating their plans, they need to know what all their students need to have the opportunity to do in the content that they're going to be putting this portfolio in. So you need to go into the planning tab. So just go to the table of contents, look under planning, look under what do I need to do. This is what candidates need to do to get ready to complete the planning task. This is something I'm going to come back to. We should be engaging with these handbooks. We should know where things are. We should be knocking around and marking them up, finding things. Once you're in the what do I need to do, just go down to the fourth bullet, and you will see the central focus, because they need to identify the central focus. So if I could ask a few of you to share the central focus in the handbook that you're looking at, so we all get a sense of what central focus is in different content areas. Bruce, could you go ahead?
Secondary social studies. The central focus should support students in learning and using facts and concepts and inquiry interpretation, or analysis skills to build and support arguments or conclusions about historical events, a topic, theme, or a social studies phenomenon.
So no matter what your topic is, no matter what you're doing in that social studies class, the students in the class should have the opportunity to demonstrate that they're engaging with that key content understanding. And it will be the same, there will be a specific key content understanding in whatever your content is. Can we hear from someone else who has one? We're done.
Ours is the elementary math, and it's simpler. Our focus is conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and mathematical reasoning and problem solving.
Exactly, so if you have a math, that would be true for elementary, middle childhood, or secondary. If you have a math portfolio that you're completing, you need to show that in your learning segment, in your 3 to 5 lessons, your students will have the opportunity to demonstrate that they have procedural fluency, that they understand what that means, they have conceptual understanding, and they have the chance to apply it, that they can problem solve, whether this is geometry, addition, whatever the math topic is. They have to be able to know the steps, know what they mean, and be able to apply them. And you have to show that in your portfolio that your students have the chance to do that. That's the central focus. Can we hear another one?
Early childhood. It's kind of interesting. In your planning commentary, you will need to provide the central focus of your learning segment along with the content standards and objectives that you plan to address. The central focus should promote the active and multimodal nature of young children's learning and developmentally appropriate learning of language and literacy within an interdisciplinary context.
So if you're an early childhood person, you may say, I'm not sure that's how I word it, or that's not the only thing that matters, but I would be hard-pressed to think you would disagree with the central focus. And if you do disagree, if you haven't picked this up yet, Scale is very happy for you to call them and talk to them about that. So rather than me sort of getting into any kind of particulars about any particular content area whether that central focus is the most particularly appropriate, bring your content area expertise to Scale by the profession for the profession and bring that feedback so that you can engage in that conversation. So I won't take more time with these, but I will say, please do that first. Please have your faculty do that. Please help everybody recognize that it all starts there. It's threaded the whole way through. It's all about the central focus. You're always showing students' abilities to demonstrate and your ability as the teacher candidate's ability to recognize if they're able to do it. And what are you going to do about that if they can't? Or how are you going to help them develop even more if they can? So that would be the first thing that I would say is a really crucial piece for faculty, that everybody understands that's what this is actually about and in their content area, and that they grow their thinking about edTPA from that starting point. There are all kinds of professional development opportunities that you can provide to your faculty. There's National Academy Consultants. I was going to pull it up to show you, but the internet has moved from unstable to defunct, so we're not going to access AACTE. But if you go to edtpa.aacte.org, there's a button right now. It's not a button, but I was born in the 60s, so I still say things like that. My kid's like, it's not a button. You can click Seek Support, and it'll take you right to the National Academy Consultant page with a list of people in your state and a list of presentations that they've been trained to provide. And any arrangement you make with them, is between you and the consultant. They're just creating a place for you to go. And sometimes bringing in outside people is a really good way to bring support to your faculty. Put them out in front of you and let them engage in some of those conversations if there's any negativity or resistance or frustration. So know that this is a service and it's just something Scale has really created across the profession to try and provide more support for faculty and for implementation. Those are just a couple examples of some of the presentations. Another opportunity you can do with faculty is taking your coursework and aligning it to the rubrics. I think I pulled this up. It's very basic, but sometimes seeing things clarifies what we're talking about. It's just pulling the descriptors from the level 3 and level 4 indicators for each for each rubric, and just come together as a faculty and say, oh, I talk about that in my course. we actually practice that in my course and see across all your coursework, are there indicators and descriptors that aren't really being touched at all, and or some that you really see, wow, this is being threaded developmentally across our program. It'll just give you a snapshot of, as we continue to improve and think about ways to align and support, where we might recognize that we have some areas that we're really covering very thoroughly and thoughtfully, and some areas where we might be having some large gaps in candidate understanding. Oh, and I have a note up there. After you candidates complete the edTPA, it'd be helpful to provide that very same matrix to them and ask them where did they feel they had support provided so that they were able to be successful or effective in responding to the prompts and recognizing what the rubrics were asking for. It's a good sort of just a self-check to see, and you'd be surprised, we've done this, and we've had plenty of candidates, you know, when there's connections to research and theory and they're referencing EdPsych that they took very early in their program. And you would think, I know that the faculty who teaches that were thrilled, you know, that they were still remembering their EdPsych days. But it's helpful to realize, of course, as they get closer and closer to actually putting their portfolio together, they're going to reference some supports that they had more recently and that were maybe more targeted. But there's things across your whole program that are preparing them to be successful teachers. And this will give you a chance to help highlight that for yourselves and your faculty. So back to that edTPA.aacte.org resource library. I would have your faculty have opportunities to go there. Certainly everyone should have access. That's the edTPA coordinator there's a little back and forth with emails and permissions, but once they're set up, they're good to go. And potentially you want to pull some resources. What happens now, when we started this in 2012, the resources were very slim pickings. But now there are so many resources that part of the problem is navigating who needs what when. But you could start identifying, well, we're going to want to pull these handbooks. We're going to want these understanding rubric level progressions. Here's a great support on providing retake support for teacher candidates. Whatever the resources, academic language, from the AACTE site, if you want to put into a password protected drive for your institution, you could have different people gather those for you. Don't leave it to the edTPA coordinator, because now you have other people getting in there. Once you're in there, you might start messing around a little bit and see other things. You realize it's a resource. If everything's left to the edTPA coordinator to get, it just keeps a gap and a distance. This is everybody's resource library, so look for ways to have the faculty who need or to engage with this get into that resource library themselves. Likewise, anyone who's using any of the handbooks or templates, you know, they're constantly being updated, which is good, because they're always being improved. But there's always this wonder if you have the most up-to-date version. So anyone who's using it, of course, it should be part of their course preparation that they go into the AACTE site and grab the most recent version of those. So again, don't have somebody else get those for them. If they're built into their course or using them in any way, even developmentally, have them make sure to go in and get them so they're sure to have the most up-to-date versions, but they're much more connected to those resources than if somebody else gets them for them. And while they're in there, the online forum is an actual really great resource. You can post your own questions, you can look at the questions that have been asked and answered and realize you can build your own capacity and knowledge about that. And it's a good place for that edTPA trivia that I was talking about earlier. You know, you see a question like, here's what I think the answer to that is. And you find that if in fact you're right. It builds your capacity in a very low-risk way and kind of starts getting you out into the community of educators that are encountering similar questions or having some challenges that maybe you're having. And then the last one that I just want to mention before we move on to the candidates is really everybody needs somebody they can call quickly for a quick piece of information. Not to, you know, find your support person, find your helpline. And I really want to, you know, really comment on how here in Illinois we've created this onboarding site. And Bruce Spitzer is here, he's sort of the architect of that. But, you know, it's an open forum on our Illinois TPAC Weebly site. You just click onboarding. There's a place to click for, what do you call it? A trusted friend. So we're inviting, come join us in that TPA land. So the the opportunity to say, here's a list of people in Illinois who are comfortable saying, if you have a quick question, feel free to call us, and if we don't know the answer, we'll find somebody. That's how we all got our information. So there's a list of people on there. There's a resources, and a list, resources are on there that are sort of the most basic pieces for what we call like edTPA 101. So we have an onboarding site here in Illinois, and it's an open resource for anyone, and any of our neighbors in other states would be welcome to access it as well. So help everybody who engages with edTPA to name their person. Who would you call with a quick question? Who are your developing resources? Because that's how sometimes you just stop being stuck and you just move to the next place. Some of these little gates that we encounter are nothing more than getting information that we need. And it will smooth the path, it'll smooth our experience with it. Okay. You're welcome to ask questions if there's anything about anything I said so far about faculty, please feel free, and I'll certainly take questions at the end as well. But I'm going to move into how all that well-informed faculty, all those higher scores on knowledge and attitude, could really be put to use in your program as well. So I heard somebody say this in the last session, and it's great when we start hearing alignment among our conversations, that one of the first things you really want to think about is the language you're using. So you may call it a unit, edTPA calls it a learning segment. It's 3 to 5 lessons, or 3 to 5 hours of instruction. Be aware of that language, not because you're wrong and it's not a unit, but because it will smooth the path for candidates. When they get to student teaching and they're going to complete a portfolio, they should already have unpacked the edTPA and be comfortable and confident about what it expects. They know the architecture, they know the expectations. Now they can get down to the business of student teaching, which is what they're there for. And they collect evidence of that work and they reflect on it and submit it as their portfolio. But they shouldn't be trying to figure out what it's asking them to do while they're doing it. So familiar language will smooth the path. Things like supports. You know, not every institution is using the same language about what you give students to help them achieve the goals that you set for them in the classroom. Certainly, and we'll talk next about academic language, but language demands, right? So as we talk about discourse and syntax, and I've heard this come up and I know it's true, we don't all use the language the same way the edTPA does. But we're not really serving our candidates by kind of digging our heels in on that when they're effectively going to need to provide evidence that they understand what syntax means in this context. So finding ways to give them that alignment of language across the program is just one more way of making it a smoother path for them. So this is really an important one, and one that we're just slowly developing in our own program. And again, we've been at this since 2012, so everybody needs time and space to build. But we're ready for this now. So what we're doing with academic language is we came together as a faculty, and we really unpacked academic language just this year. And again, we've been doing this since 2012. So we knew that we didn't really have alignment and understanding, which just breeds frustration and anxiety, even amongst us, never mind what we're then communicating to our candidates. So what we did was we had our own professional development on this and came to some understandings, looked at where across our programs we were doing kind of that introduction and development and practice opportunities in our different courses. And now what we're trying to find is ways to actually be explicit with our candidates while we're teaching. So while you're in your coursework, show them how you're recognizing the language demands of what you're doing and how you're providing supports for those. So here, and I'm not actually doing a very good job of teaching you this, right? Because I'm not engaging with you, I'm not going to be assessing you, I'm not going to be developing plans based on what you were able to do in this session. But let's assume that I was doing this fabulous lesson with you right now. And I was going to say, well, my goal for you is to be able to explain supports that you can use for candidates so they can be successful teachers. And I wanted you to be able to explain that. So the language function, the language demand is explain. I'm expecting you to do that with language. I'm expecting this class that I'm teaching right now, that the product of that is that you will be engaged with the demand, the language demand of having to be able to explain something. So I'm telling you that right now. When you're teaching, do that with your candidates. And what supports am I providing so that you're able to explain? Well, I'm providing a PowerPoint, and it will be, there for your reference after this session, so you'll be able to go back to it, right? So that's simple enough right there. I've just shown you the language function of this lesson. I've just shown you the support, and I'm doing it while I'm teaching you. Likewise, you could do that with any of the demands. So what are some of the vocabulary that we're talking about today? So we talked about central focus and other things. But with central focus, what support did I provide to you so that you were able to understand what I meant by saying central focus? I had you go into the handbook, right? And share out, that was a support. So if I actually had some product I wanted you to provide today with language, I wanted to hear you explain it. Maybe we would all get up and we'll go with a partner and explain the supports that you could take back to your campus. That would be the discourse. That's the product, the language product that we need to see, that I hope you're able to do, and that I need to support you in being able to do that. So maybe if I was being careful, I would have created a template for all of you and handed that out so that you would have that support, that you knew when you were going to explain it that I was going to support you by giving you kind of an outline. Or maybe I only did that for some of you, because I knew some of you were really new to edTPA and that this was just all too much information at once, and you would need a graphic organizer. So I would give just some of you that, and that would be a targeted support. Right? So I'm doing more for some of you because I know some of you need more. But is there any syntax to this lesson? Is there any certain way that I would need you to explain this? Does it have to go in a certain order? Are there rules to the way I would want you to explain this back at your programs? There really aren't. So there's no support that I would need to give you for syntax, because that's not part of the expectation of what a demand should be from this lesson. So if I did that all the time with my candidates while I'm teaching them in my methods or EdPsych or any other class, if I showed them, here's the demand, here's how I'm supporting you, they would become so comfortable with what those words meant, and they would be able to translate that very easily into what they're doing in their own classes. Okay, so for research and theory, a great way to support your candidates is across your program is to start some kind of system in your program where they collect research and theory as they go, but then they're called upon to go to their own resource to provide justification for responses they give in class or for assignments. So they're developing their own body of research and theory that they draw upon, whether it's a paper, foldable thing, whether it's electronic. But again, across your programs, not just telling them what research and theory is, but having them collect it, having them be actively engaged in that process, and then each of your faculty knowing that that's happening, making sure that they're using it then in their subsequent courses, so that it's a real resource, not just something they have to tack on later, like, oh man, I need some research for this. I already made the decision. I know I'm just going to use it, but now let me find something that supports it. Actually build in that way of thinking about, well, let me go see if I can find something in here that would guide my decision. So that's something that you could really build an approach to using research and theory that would be very sophisticated and something that's not going to happen naturally if we don't cultivate it. So it's only going to feel like an add-on if it is an add-on. So if we want it to be authentic, we need to use it ourselves. Okay, another support for candidates could be how you use your lesson plan template. We just last year did do a tweak on ours. We put together a subcommittee and we revisited it for all the things we were trying to get evidence of and ways that candidates could be explicit in practice. The kinds of things we need to make sure they're doing to be successful teachers. And we aligned some of that language, as I talked about familiar language, to the edTPA. So we didn't do that in 2012, we didn't do that in 2015, we just did that. And then we piloted it. And then we got feedback. What's missing? What doesn't make sense? What's confusing? And we were realistic about how much information we were asking for that kind of deep work on a lesson plan. So we only require one of those to be completed per day for our student teachers and our clinical candidates. Actually, we kind of phase out over student teaching into what is our format for any other lessons taught, our shorter format, which is just pulling out some of these pieces. So think about what you could put in there. And some of the things you're obviously putting in there, right? You're already aligning your objectives to standards, I'm sure, and your, and your objectives to assessments. So that's probably in place, but are you thinking about putting in anything about personal, cultural, or community assets? Are you thinking about naming the language demands of the lesson and the supports? And I would be careful with candidates where you place something like that on the template. We moved it to the end because you have to really plan your lesson and then analyze it to see where are the demands? Where are the language demands in here? Oh, okay, here's what I'm asking them to do, as opposed to saying, I'm going to have it up top, I'm going to start writing about those demands, but now I'm going to go ahead and plan my lesson. So thinking about, though, if we're going to talk about personal, cultural, and community assets, that has to be at the top. Because you can't plan the lesson until you know what you're thinking about, what your students bring to the table so you can leverage it for learning. So thinking intentionally about where these pieces go in the natural process of planning. And these are just suggestions, you probably have others, of ways that you could be including things that they get to practice and you're explicit about. And planning is something that, we're already all doing with our candidates, of course, so here's an opportunity, right? And if you didn't do it, maybe it was something that was once a week and with this kind of depth. Are they tying their instructional decision-making to research and theory? When can they show you that they do that? We've moved to the CPAST evaluation tool at USF, which I think is what they were referencing it from Georgia. And that they're evaluated in CPAST. I can't remember what it stands for, but CPAST. It's outstanding, by the way. I am the field experience coordinator, so that's my job. And I can tell you that I've never been happier with an assessment, and neither have my supervisors, than with what this looks like. So we can talk about that at some point if you want. But with CPAS, they are expected, they're evaluated in their student teaching semester on their ability to tie their decision-making, instructional decision-making, research and theory. Where will we see that in student teaching, if not in our planning? This is another real simple one, easy, just low-hanging fruit here. We just put a context for learning in every field experience. Our candidates, for the most part, are in field experience every semester. Sometimes it's just an observation, sometimes it's a full-blown clinical, and sort of every little permutation in between. They always complete a context for learning. And it's a great example how if you practice something, you will not be confused by it and you will not be frustrated by it. Nobody worries about this when we get to that TPA. They've been doing it every semester. And we pull them right from the handbooks. And it's a very helpful way because we're not just trying to pass the edTPA, right? We're trying to create successful teachers and bring them out into the world. So what we're also highlighting for our candidates is this is where it all begins. You need to know who your students are. You need to be thinking about them very intentionally. And so you can't just write a second grade math lesson. You have to write it for these students. Well, who are these students? So this is an opportunity to just highlight that priority, but it also is a way to build some capacity and familiarity in terms of getting ready for their portfolio that they'll complete with their student teaching. I mentioned this one earlier, just get into that handbook. So a couple of you have handbooks out right now, and could you find instruction prompt 2 if I told you to go find it? Why don't you do that? Instruction prompt 2, where would you even go? Like, are you familiar with the handbook? Is it your friend? And I will never admit out loud how long it took me as the edTPA coordinator to actually read one of those. Because it's just embarrassing. It didn't occur to me for a pretty long time that I might need to do that. I was so busy figuring out what we would record with and so busy running around without permissions, and I never actually read the handbook. So now whenever I do a training, I try to do this with people, and it's always awkward in the beginning. It's always confusing, and people aren't really sure where to begin.
I think it timed me out. That's enough of you.
Oh my gosh, the clicker. This is a full service clicker right here. An extra month. Thank you, Lance. Thinking about finding that prompt, I'll tell you where you would go. Go to the table of contents, you would go to the instruction task, you would go to what do I need to write because that's where all the prompts are, and then you would go to that page and you would go to number 2. If I said to you, how do you know how long the video clips can be for your content, where would you go? The evidence chart in the back. It's in the table of contents, you can flip right to it. If I said, what is academic language? What's the definition of academic language? You would go to the glossary. Have you ever actually gone to the glossary? It's like the snore of the whole handbook, right? But there's some useful information there. And if you read the academic language description, the very first thing you should do with your candidates is have them go through and circle and highlight all the words they're not sure what they mean. And have them describe what academic language means for the edTPA in their own words. Unpack it, use it, that's a support. So I have tons of examples like that I could say, try this, go find that. Do that with your handbooks. Start using them, open them up, send candidates into them, mark them up. And then the next thing I slide is about the making good choices, which is kind of like the Lonely Planet version of, the traveler's map, right? It's just that, it's just comfortable to know where people like to eat and the best way to dress and what shoes you might want to wear when you do that. Making good choices is just a wraparound document to help with that handbook. Everything your candidates need is in that handbook. They could do the entire thing without a support seminar. They don't need fancy help. They don't need all these resources. It's all in there. But we are building capacity and we're trying to keep people from feeling anxiety about demonstrating what they know. And the making good choices is like a supplemental way to do that. So you could do a little crosswalk between the two, right? You could take your making good choices and your handbook and have candidates find things and tag them in the crosswalk of where they see them in each one. It'll force them to get in there and read them and find what they need. So when they go to use their handbook, it's a trusted friend. Okay, so kind of getting close to the end here, but actually, when is the end? 1:30, how close am I?
We've got 10 minutes.
Okay, so I'm kind of on target for time, in case you're worried. So the edTPA, I think you do want to tell your candidates when something aligns with edTPA because it will help them feel relaxed that they're being prepared. If they're worried about it and they think they don't know anything about it, you do want to show them like, oh, and this is something that you'll be showing and demonstrating as your edTPA portfolio. It kind of just gives them that like you're on the right track. You're headed in the right direction, but let's get focused on why we're here. We're actually here to talk about an assessment or whatever it is that you're actually focused on. But I would just mention it in passing. You really have to avoid that, this will be for your edTPA. You'll need this for the edTPA. You really just want to show them that they're being prepared. They're not going to have any challenges or confusion about this. They're going to know what to do. But again, let's get back to talking about becoming successful teachers. So while I would mention it, I would not frame everything around that. I don't think it's actually why we're here, and I don't think that it helps anybody put this in the context in which it belongs, which is one of multiple measures. Because one of the things that people, once they say, fine, okay, edTPA, then they get angry about all the things edTPA actually doesn't measure. It doesn't measure good writing. How could this possibly pass? Do you see that writing? It's not about writing, right? It's about planning, instruction, assessment, ability to analyze, decision-making, and academic language supports. That's what it's about. You have to build in all those other things yourself because we care about a lot of other things. You really want to make sure they have opportunities to practice. So I would suggest something in a methods course where they can do some formative work, a mini edTPA. Our secondary candidates do not have the luxury of building it into their coursework, so we do workshops with them the semester before student teaching. We don't call them boot camps, because that sounds so unpleasant, right? Why would you want to go to boot camp? You hope it doesn't kill you. What we wanted them to do is go to a workshop. It's professional. There'll probably be food, it sounds like, that sounds nice. I could do that. So we had 4 workshops. We do an overview one, and I have learned to schedule them for 2 hours at a time, if you plan to do this. 1 hour is not quite enough, and you usually get out early, so they're happy with the 2 hours. So we schedule them for 2 hours, and we do an overview of what it is and all the pieces, and then we do a task 1, and then we do a task 2, and then we do a task 3. We use exemplars from our own program, and they feel clear. They know what it is. They know what to expect. They've looked at a sample. So even though they didn't get the chance to embed it in a methods course, we have seen no drop-off in terms of their confidence or success rate. So the workshops are absolutely effective if you can't build it in another way, and I recommend that. We do have a seminar during our student teaching semester. We have our candidates leave the field early on Fridays. As the keynote speaker said, this is not telling you to do this, it's just an example of one way to do it. We found those nighttime seminars were exhausting, and we're all about, again, kind of capacity and anxiety and thinking about stress levels. So candidates leave the field every Friday in time to be in class at 1 o'clock on our campus. And that's when, in the first half of the semester, is our edTPA, we call it Evidence of Teaching, that's the name of the class. Evidence of Teaching, they meet every Friday at 1 o'clock. And then once the edTPA is submitted, they keep meeting every Friday at 1 o'clock for Professional Growth Seminar, looking at their resumes, doing mock interviews, looking at that professional growth plan, which I can't tell you has been so great for our program, that the scale document. If you're not using it, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. So the support seminar just keeps them on time. It's a scaffold, it's a support. It just keeps, tasks are due in the class at a certain time, it just keeps them on track to get things turned in. But what they submit for their edTPA portfolio is their work. So the class is not about making their edTPA great, it's about keeping them on track. We also provide these thinking organizers. Is that something you're familiar with? Raise your hand if you've seen the thinking organizer. Not too many, so would you mind pulling that up for me, Lance? It's one of the Word documents. I picked like 3 just to show you. So this is not in the resource library because it wasn't designed by scale. It's in the online forum. But anybody can access it. I'm happy to send them to you. Every content area has one. And they were created by Lisa Palmer, and her group at ISU did most of them, and a couple other people helped. It's on the desktop.
Is that it?
No, no.
It's not even showing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a great way. We use this in our support center in the beginning to kind of map out the pieces they'll need. It's available for all of you, and you could tweak it to do whatever you want to do with it, but it just helps break down for them all the things they're going to need. Like I just did this thing with central focus and their learning segment goals. Sorry, is it not? Oh, all right, well, trust me on this one. There's these thinking organizers are awesome. So I will give you my, so again, if you go to look for it, it's not in the resource library, it's in the online forum because it was submitted by Elisa Palmer as a resource. That's why the online forum is such a nice example of the field supporting, we're all supporting each other. And they've made these available for everybody, they've done a lot of the legwork. And if you have any trouble finding them or accessing them, we'll get them to you, that you have contact information. My information's on this presentation that will be uploaded, so you can always contact me, I'll send them to you. But it's basically just a way of having them outline the important pieces that they're going to need to be thinking about all along the way. And it's a great way of kind of grabbing this thing that might feel unruly and putting it all down on paper like any good outline does for any kind of project, right? If we could go back one. In the seminar we just review the tasks and the rubrics, and then we also have program exemplars, right? So we've been doing this for a while now. So we have permissions from the candidates. If you're not doing that, be sure you have permission from your candidates to use their portfolios for program improvement, and then you'll be able to share them with future candidates, and it's really a help. It's really helped, and as every semester passes, we have more and more to choose from, so that's been great. So that's what we do in this seminar. Another way to help your candidates is to have them practice recording. I said something about this in an earlier session, but you don't want game day to be when they go to find out if their tech is working. There can be a lot of anxiety around the recording piece, and so figuring out how to just move that along would be having them do it enough before the time comes that they know how to do this. And their students have seen that recording device set up in the classroom before. They've practiced taking it off the device so that they don't ever worry that they ran out of space while they were trying to record. They know how to do the 2 things they need to know how to do, right? They need to know how to trim, because they're going to pull video clips, and they're going to need to know how to compress, because they're going to have to upload those clips. That's all they need to know how to do. I've lost so much time in my life, valuable time. I've been doing great things, trying to figure out all about this recording device and calling everybody and researching and bringing in our tech. We used to bring in tech people who were very confusing and made it worse. And then we brought in a millennial work study kid because we thought they all spoke the same language and it would work so much better. And they were still confused. And now we just realized this is a non-issue for us. And I don't think we are doing anything special. They're using their phones. We have iPads in the library if they want to check them out. They have to set them up early to find out if they can be heard and seen. And I just heard a great free piece of advice from another session that you can show your candidates a list of condition codes at the beginning of the seminar so that they can see all the things that the technology might get in their way. Right? They can find out right up front that if they can't be heard or seen, that they're not going to be able to be assessed in the instruction task. And their students need to be seen. So those are pieces that you might be able to alleviate with just good information and practice in advance. This will be quick because I don't think that there's much of a role for cooperating teachers and administrators. But now we're launching into really our approach to this. So different institutions do this very differently. I've seen a range of ways that we partner around edTPA. And here's all we do. We're on a need-to-know basis. So I send a very brief PowerPoint outline in notes format to the principals and the cooperating teachers every semester. We're going to have student teachers. I copy the student teachers and their supervisors, so everybody saw what I sent. It's very brief. I'd be happy to share it with you. It's just basically what it is, how it aligns to actually the Danielson framework, because that's their evaluation. All that we'll need from them is maybe some help getting permission slips back, and this should have no impact on their classroom. I'm very emphatic about that. This is the candidate's summative work. It should not impact the cooperating teacher or the students, and if it is, I ask every semester for the candidates to come and tell me if they're doing anything that's not authentic, and if in any way it's changing what would be happening because they're there. I want to know about it because I either want to help clarify why that doesn't need to happen, or I want to recognize that there's a gap in my understanding and that this is actually a reality we have to make some sense out of, but we have not yet had that happen. I actually have one example with a very unique discipline philosophy in a school where students have to go find other classrooms to pull themselves together, and they're not able to function effectively in the classroom. They gather up their things and they wander the halls and they find a teacher who will take them in. It's very interesting. There's like 2 schools, I think, in the country that do this. One's in California and one's in Joliet. And so our candidate legitimately had kids wandering into her video. I'm like, okay, you got me, Erin. That's tricky. That's the first time I've had anybody get me, though. So please hold that litmus up. This should not be a problem for your schools. This is your candidate's capstone work. We need their classrooms for it to be authentic, but it's not their work. So I feel strongly about this. And so again, I send them just a little info, and then I offer to give them more info if they'd like it. I'm happy to share. I used to get out handbooks, exactly where those wound up. I used to do, all kinds of information overload, which actually just made them probably not want to have a candidate because they thought they were going to be involved and that they needed all this information, and they don't. So we really just try to clearly let them know what we expect and that it shouldn't impact them in any way. So the who needs, what, when, I mentioned earlier, this proliferation of resources. So you don't want to give everything out to everybody, So early candidates, they just need a brief overview. Because if you don't tell them what it is, they might think it's this just bare that they're not going to be able to wrestle when the time comes. Just give them just a quick snapshot of, you're going to grab evidence of your ability to plan for students, how you teach them, and how you think about whether they learned anything. We're going to give you all the tools you need along the way. Just how they say young children, like they'll ask the questions about what they really want to know. In that exchange, if those early candidates have some questions that might be creating anxiety, they'll ask them in that forum, and you can alleviate that anxiety, but you don't need to give them much more information than that. All the cooperating teachers need to know is what's expected of them, which is nothing. Supervisors, I think, need a basic overview because they're interfacing with the candidates, and you can do some real damage. As a supervisor, which I was for 10 years, I heard about things the candidates were doing in their coursework, and I was like, oh, that sounds awful. I didn't know what it really was, so whatever it was, their work sample or whatever. So they do need to be informed, supervisors. And again, there's always an invitation to learn more. But our supervisors are not there to help our candidates complete their edTPA. In our program, they're there to supervise their student teaching experience. But I think they need some information about what that looks like. I think your arts and science faculty need to understand that central focus. So get that key content understanding tied to what they're doing in their coursework, so they understand that's where this is headed for their future science teachers, their future math teachers. That it's the key content understandings, which they will certainly value, but help give them the language for that. And then the student teachers just need the steps to be successful, the timelines, the templates. I would recommend only using that understanding rubric level progressions after they've completed their portfolio, so they can use it as a self-check, but not as something they're trying to write to or complete toward, because I think that's overwhelming. You don't know where to begin. I always say, just answer the question. Just answer the question. Then you can use this as a check. Did you answer it at this level, or did you answer it at this level? But not trying to write to the URLP. I think that is paralyzing, actually. And then the permissions, that's kind of a thing, right? So just want to make sure that you have a little checklist to support your candidates, because you don't want to get snagged. And this is all about candidate support, even though I was just talking about cooperating teachers, and I spent a lot of time talking about faculty. Because if those pieces are out of place, it will influence the candidates. 1 week ago, I was at an event in Illinois with a fellow teacher educator from another institution who has a lot of frustration around the edTPA, and she was saying, it's just ridiculous. I mean, nobody has taught these candidates how to put captions in their video, and I keep saying somebody needs to teach them how to do this. And I'm thinking, they don't put captions in their video, but she thinks they do. Apparently her candidates think they do. She's not implementing edTPA, but she's with them. And it's getting perpetuated, and they're very anxious and frustrated. So the people who are engaging with the candidates in the field, which is what she was a part of her role, they should be aware of what's expected and have a place to go with their questions. So we don't, likewise with the permissions though, we don't want to lose sight of these things can get in the way. They can't post their materials. We just do an electric sign-in in our coursework for this, that they can use it for program improvement, that we can utilize that, but we're not going to post it or share it, and neither can they. And that the parent permissions are there too. So that's just make a little checklist so you have a system so you don't get candidates in a bind because you didn't have the right permissions in place, and now you have to retroactively try and get some work done with that. The smoother we are with all that, the smoother they will be.
134.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to wrap up then. So all you need for retakes is you need to have a plan, and they need some clarity. I brought a sample of what we use. It's a one-page document. It just outlines, should you need to do a retake, here's exactly what you can expect. We give that to them at the beginning of student teaching, knowing they're not going to need it, but helping them not wonder what would happen if. Right? We're trying to decrease anxiety, and all the information's out in front. So just a simple clarity on our part with a plan and giving it to them, I think that will smooth a lot of that. So I'll pull all those descriptors back up of successful teaching. This is what all these supports are for. And it's just, I started there and I want to end here. We want the candidates to be able to do these things, and when they can do these things, because across our program we have supported them, they will absolutely be able to demonstrate them in their edTPA portfolio. I think that's it. It is it. Thank you.